Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for our first hearing of the 112th Congress. I can't think of a more appropriate subject to begin our oversight than a discussion of the Department of Defense's top-line budget expectations. The manner in which Secretary Gates is bringing fiscal discipline to the department and his proposals for finding efficiencies to reinvest in much-needed modernization and operations. Before we get started, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our new leadership team. In adopting the committee rules last week, the committee reorganized the jurisdictions of the subcommittees to align with military missions rather than individual military departments. Our new subcommittees and leadership teams are Emerging Threats and Capabilities, Chairman Mac Thornberry, Ranking Member James Langevin. For Military Personnel, Chairman Joe Wilson, Ranking Member Susan Davis. For Oversight and Investigations, Chairman Rob Whitman, Ranking Member Jim Cooper. For Readiness, Chairman Randy Forbes and Ranking Member Madeline Bordallo. For Sea Power and Projection Forces, Chairman Todd Aiken, Ranking Member Mike McIntyre. For Strategic Forces, Chairman Mike Turner and Ranking Member Loretta Sanchez. And last but not least, for Tactical Air and Land Forces, Chairman Roscoe Bartlett and Ranking Member Sylvester Reyes. I couldn't be more pleased about the selection of these members for our leadership team for the 112th Congress and appreciate the great depth and breadth of experience that they each bring to the table. I'm confident that we'll have a productive and purposeful year, and I look forward to working with each of them. As we get this new session started, there are a few administrative issues that I'd like to reiterate. First, questioning will occur in regular order by seniority of those present before the gavel, and then by order in which members arrive. That's how we will proceed today. There will be some hearings where we will vary from that. We'll explain it as we go through. Second, there will be strict enforcement of the 5-minute rule. Finally, to minimize obstruction of the walkways, only members and committee staff are permitted on the dais during the hearing. Thank you for your cooperation, and let's get started. In September, we held a preliminary hearing on the Department's Efficiencies initiative. At that time, I expressed concern about the lack of information that we'd been provided. I remain dismayed, despite repeated assurances from the Department about an interest to work together on these issues, that we've seen little change in the Department's willingness to share information. Now, let me be clear on this. I agree with Secretary Gates that we must scrutinize defense programs to ensure that we're getting the most bang for our buck and concentrating our limited resources on the highest priority programs. I support initiatives focused on reducing waste, streamlining operations, and eliminating redundancies across all enterprises. However, I will not support initiatives that will leave our military less capable and less ready to fight. And make no mistake about it, we stand at a critical juncture in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. As we draw down in one AOR and build up in another, the decisions that we make today will directly impact the level of success of these efforts. I cannot say it strongly enough. I will not support any measures that stress our forces and jeopardize the safety of our men and women in uniform. I will oppose also any plans that have the potential to damage or endanger our national security. Most concerning about the Efficiencies initiative are the plans to reduce the Army and Marine Corps end strength and to implement even deeper cuts beyond the initial $100 billion goal. The reduction of an additional $78 billion from the Department's funding top line caught this committee by surprise, and we intend to pursue the impact of this decision by the administration. We've asked much of our men and women in uniform over the years. They've bravely fought and sacrificed for all of us, each and every one of us in this room. And I cannot in good conscience ask them to do more with less. Now I'd like to turn to our ranking member, Adam Smith from Washington, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, congratulations on being the chairman of the committee. This is our first formal open hearing. I have not had the chance to publicly congratulate you on that. You have already done a terrific job of reaching out to me and to our side of the aisle. I think we're going to have a great working relationship, and I very much look forward to that. So thank you, Buck, and congratulations again. And I think this hearing is perfectly appropriate. It is always the #1 duty of this committee to make sure that our national security is provided for, to make sure that our troops and those who are fighting to protect us have the resources that they need to do the job that we on the civilian side ask them to do. Everybody on this committee has done an outstanding job of making sure that that priority stays right at the top of our list, and I think we've done an admirable job of that through the years, and I'm sure that we will continue to do so. But as we go forward, we have to be mindful of the fact that just spending money doesn't necessarily make us safer. And I think anybody who spends, just a few minutes looking at the Pentagon budget, including the gentlemen before us today who are going to testify, will readily agree that there are savings and efficiencies to be found within the Department of Defense budget. There's absolutely no question about it. We have wrestled over the years with a variety of different programs that were funded that turned out not to do what we wanted them to do, and we wound up wasting a lot of money, quite frankly. I know this committee in particular in the last couple of years has been very focused on acquisition reform. Mr. Andrews has been a leader on that, as well as others on both sides of the aisles, to try to figure out how to get more for what we spend. And I want to emphasize that point. Wasting money anywhere in our budget, even in the Department of Defense, does not make us safer, does not protect our troops, and does not enhance our national security. In fact, it does just the opposite. So this committee, and you gentlemen, as well as everyone at the Pentagon, have an obligation not just to spend the money, but to make sure we're spending it efficiently and effectively. And I really want to applaud Secretary Gates and the others at the DoD for stepping up to that very difficult challenge, to looking at our budget and saying, where can we save money? Because there's no place where you're going to save money where somebody isn't going to complain about it. As the quote always goes, one person's waste is another person's income. It's not going to be easy, no matter how you do it. But I believe you gentlemen and Secretary Gates have stepped up and begun a very, very important process to find those savings. I applaud that effort. We look forward to learning more about the details. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't put this into the broader framework of our budget deficit in our budget. There is a growing consensus in this country that the deficit is too high, the debt is too high, and we are out of balance. Now, that consensus falls apart when you begin to talk about where you're going to cut or how you're going to raise the revenue to make up for that. Understandably so, because these are difficult decisions. But the math here is unrelenting, and we shouldn't forget about that. 2010, we spent $3.5 trillion and took in about $2.3 trillion in revenue. That's a $1.2 trillion difference. That's about 33% of everything we spend. So if you started just from a logical standpoint, you would say, to get us back to balance, we need to cut 33% out of everything that we spend. If you want to take 20% of the budget, which defense is, off the table, you're then down to about $2.8 trillion that you have to cut $1 trillion out of, and that means that you have to cut somewhere in the neighborhood of 45% out of everything. And that's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Homeland Security, infrastructure, education, on down the line. I say all of that to make sure that we are mindful of the difficult challenge that we face, and also to remind everybody that our national security is also dependent upon having a strong economy. If we wind up, putting our country in a fiscal hole that we can't get out of, collapsing our economy, making it difficult for U.S. industries to prosper and thrive, they're not going to be in a position to provide the valuable help that they do to our national security apparatus. So we have a tough job ahead of us, but savings and efficiencies are going to have to be found, and I, for my part, am absolutely convinced that we can continue to provide the best national security possible, give our support to the troops that they deserve, and still find savings within the Pentagon budget. I think this hearing is the first start in that process. I know the gentlemen in front of us have worked very, very hard on this problem. I look forward to hearing their testimony, and I look forward to working with the chairman and with the Pentagon and all members of this committee to find those savings and make sure that we continue to provide national security in every sense of the word. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce our witnesses this morning. We have first the Honorable William J. Lynn III, the Deputy Secretary of Defense from the Defense Department, General Peter W. Corelli, Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, Admiral Jonathan W. Greenert, Vice Chief of Naval Operations, U.S. Navy. General Joseph F. Dunford, Jr., Assistant Commandant, U.S. Marine Corps. General Philip M. Breedlove, Vice Chief of Staff, U.S. Air Force. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today and discuss our efficiency efforts at the Department of Defense. Before I start, I'd like to extend my thoughts and support to one of the members of your committee who's not here today, Representative Gabrielle Gifford, as well as her husband, Navy Captain Mark Kelly, and the others affected by the events in Tucson. Gabby and Mark are part of the military family, and we are very much cheering Gabby on as she begins her rehabilitation. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by the Vice Chiefs of Staff of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, as well as the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. I'll have a brief statement, and then we'll turn to your questions for the bulk of the hearing. The leadership of the Department is well aware that the nation is dealing with significant fiscal pressures. We owe it to the taxpayers to make the most of every dollar entrusted to us. Indeed, we could all benefit from following the direction of President Eisenhower, who believed we should spend whatever is necessary for national defense, but not one penny more. To that end, the Department sought in both the fiscal year 2010 and the fiscal year 2011 budgets to curtail or eliminate programs that were either too troubled to continue or that provided capabilities that were too narrow to justify their costs. We identified more than 20 programs in those categories that would have cost more than $300 billion if pursued to their completion. We have also initiated a comprehensive search for greater efficiencies in our business operations, our personnel system, and our headquarters structure. Specifically, Secretary Gates laid out 3 objectives that I will describe today. The services first were directed to achieve $100 billion in efficiencies over the 5-year future year defense plan. Second, the services could retain and invest those efficiency savings in enhancements of high-priority warfighting programs. And third, the Department developed additional efficiencies and other changes to accommodate a $78 billion reduction in our top line that contributed to the administration's deficit reduction efforts. Over the past 6 months, the military services have undertaken a comprehensive examination of their overhead accounts to achieve the $100 billion savings objective the Secretary issued them. The savings come from numerous sources. A portion are generated by reorganizations that reassign personnel and reduce layering in the Department. For example, the Army will consolidate 6 installation management command regions into 4 and close the evaluation task force. The Navy will eliminate selected squadron staffs and disestablish the 2nd Fleet in Norfolk. The Air Force will consolidate 4 Air Operations Centers and 3 numbered Air Force staffs. The services will also achieve savings through implementing better business practices. For example, the Army will leverage efforts of other organizations to reduce the number of data centers, and the Navy will shift 6,000 billets from shore-based installations to increase shipboard manning. Finally, the Air Force will implement better business practices in satellite procurement, establishing more stability in the development process and utilizing block buys in procurement. In addition to these business practice efficiencies, the services garnered savings through reductions in programs that either cost too much or provided too little capability. The Army will terminate procurement of the SLAM-RAM surface-to-air missile and the non-line-of-sight launch system. The Marine Corps will terminate the Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle. As directed by the Secretary, all savings realized by a military department will be retained and reinvested in that department. Approximately $28 billion of the total savings will be used over the next 5 years to deal with higher than expected operating expenses. The remaining savings, some $70 billion, will be used to enhance high-priority military capabilities. The Air Force will begin development and acquisition of a new long-range bomber, and maintain maximum procurement levels of Reaper UAVs. The Army will invest more heavily in modernization of the Army's battle fleet of Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, and Stryker wheeled vehicles. The Navy plans to use its savings to buy 6 more ships than were in last year's plan, including an additional destroyer. In sum, our efficiency initiatives will permit improvement in warfighting capabilities in ways that would not have been fiscally possible in the absence of the efficiency campaign. However, Congressman Smith indicated the strength of our national defense ultimately depends on a strong economy as well. So as part of the administration's broader effort to address the deficit, the Department reduced its top-line budget for FY12 through FY 2016. This reduction, which totaled $78 billion compared with last year's plan, will still result in a defense base budget request of $553 billion in fiscal year 2012 and modest real growth in the near years of the future year's defense plan. We accommodated this top-line reduction through additional efficiencies and other changes outside the warfighting accounts. For instance, Secretary Gates has imposed a freeze on civilian personnel levels in the Department through FY 2013, allowing limited exceptions to accommodate growth in the acquisition workforce and a few other essential areas. The Secretary also mandated a reduction of 10% per year for 3 years in the number of contractors who augment government staffs. We have sought to address the enormous growth in our medical costs through management efficiencies while continuing to improve high-quality military health care. We believe, though, it is time to lift the 15-year freeze on TRICARE enrollment fees for working-age retirees. We believe it is time to phase out subsidies that DoD currently provides to a small number of non-military hospitals, and we are making adjustments in pharmacy copays that will both, we think, improve the benefit as well as develop cost efficiencies. Finally, we are taking steps to streamline our organizational structure. As the Secretary announced last August, we are disestablishing the Joint Forces Command and the Business Transformation Agency, and we are eliminating the position of Assistant Secretary for Networks and Information Integration. In addition, we will pursue efficiencies in intelligence operations and in our information technology investments. Mr. Chairman, the proposals we are describing today are the result of a detailed, comprehensive budget and program review led by Secretary Gates and involving the senior military and civilian leadership of the Department. I know that some will argue that our proposals cut defense too much. Others will argue that we have not cut enough. We believe this budget strikes the right balance for these difficult times. In Secretary Gates' own words, this budget proposal represents a reasonable, responsible, and sustainable level of defense spending for the next 5 years. I want to end my statement by thanking the Chairman and the committee for your strong support of the Department, and particularly for your strong support of the men and women who bear the burdens of our national defense. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The $78 billion top-line reduction was a surprise to us when we went into the briefing with the Secretary. We thought we were going to be talking and getting more detail on the $100 billion, then we also found out about the $78 billion. What guidance was provided by the administration to the Department with regard to the top-line budget reductions across the future year's defense program, and when was this guidance received?
Mr. Chairman, the top line, as this past year, as it all, I think, in every year with every administration, was developed in a discussion between the White House, led in particular by the Office of Management and Budget, and the Defense Department. We had a iterative discussion that included the President. We settled on the $78 billion number as a number that we thought we could achieve through efficiencies that did not undermine any of our warfighting capabilities. And as to the timing, the final numbers were developed in December.
And have other departments received similar instructions?
Yes, they have, but I wouldn't be able to give you the exact numbers of those other departments. But the similar process was done with all of the departments.
Similar percentages of cuts?
I'm not in a position to release the whole administration's budget. My belief, though, is that that the Defense Department had fewer reductions than many other departments.
And we'll see those when the President's budget is submitted?
When the President's budget is submitted, you'll see all of them, of course, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. How will this $78 billion top-line reduction affect the execution of the fiscal year 2011 funding priorities?
At least off the top of my head, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it would affect the FY11. The challenge with fiscal year 11 is that we don't yet know what the final number is going to be. As you well know, we're operating under a continuing resolution, and we're waiting congressional action. So the challenge in fiscal year 11 is how to operate either under a continuing resolution or ultimately a mid-year appropriation. That was a challenge in preparing the program. It's a challenge in executing the budget. But I don't think the development of the 12 to 16 program will affect execution of fiscal 11.
Okay. The Secretary stated on January 6th that this plan, and I quote, represents, in my view, the minimum level of defense spending that's necessary given the complex and unpredictable array of security challenges the United States faces around the globe. Then he went on to explain why further cuts to force structure would be calamitous. However, the Secretary also indicated just last year that 2 to 3% real growth was necessary beyond 2015 to prevent cuts to force structure. How will you maintain this level of modernization that the Secretary believes is necessary to protect our national security in the face of 0% real growth in the coming years?
The Secretary has indicated that to maintain force structure and to absorb the growth that you see due to technology enhancements and personnel benefit enhancements, that you do need a 2 to 3% real growth with a constant force structure. For that reason, when we are going to have a proposed flat budget in fiscal 15 and 16, we believe that you do need some force reductions, and we have put planning in there for a reduction of 27,000 in the Army end strength and 15 to 20,000 in the Marine Corps end strength. Now that reduction will take place after we think we will have drawn down substantially in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and so that our international commitments should not be at today's levels.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, this is a starting point. Can you keep the numbers in, I think, proper perspective? Can you walk us through a little bit how much the defense budget has increased in the last 6 or 7 years? You talk about those in-strength numbers. They've gone up significantly, and understandably so, with our commitments in Iraq and Afghanistan. But do you have just a little bit of the numbers of how much we've actually increased the budget in the last 7 or 8 years in the Department of Defense? And try to include OCO in that as well, not just what the baseline is.
I believe since 2001, the budget, the base budget has come close to doubling.
Right.
And of course, the end strength numbers are up, particularly in the Army and the Marine Corps, and would still be higher even after the proposed reductions in 2015 and 2016 than they were when Secretary Gates took office, and that was really the high point of the Iraqi conflict. In terms of the OCO budget, that is about $160 billion this year. Obviously, going back to 2001, before the conflict, before 9/11, before the conflict in Afghanistan, that essentially would have been zero.
Right. But if we add it up over the 6 or 7 years that we've had supplementals, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 trillion in addition to that doubling of the defense budget that has happened.
That's correct.
That's fair. A couple quick questions on specific programs. The F-35, most expensive program we've got going, has experienced some troubles. Can you give us a little bit of an indication of our efforts to try to get those costs under control and get us an actual product for a reasonable price?
Yes, Congressman. The F-35 is certainly a critical program for the department. It's the fifth generation fighter that we think that we need to have in the decade following this. The development program, frankly, has not gone as smoothly as we'd hoped. The costs have risen. We have taken additional steps this year to, frankly, present the committee with a more conservative program in 3 fundamental ways. One, the most difficult aspect of the program has been the development of the Stovall version of the F-35, which is the most complicated version. We have decoupled the development of that aircraft from the carrier-based and the Air Force versions, which are proceeding a bit better, so that they will not be held back. And we've put it on what the Secretary's called a 2-year probation. We're going to continue the program. We're going to try and work through the development issues, and we're going to decide at the end of 2 years whether to go forward with the program in the strong hope that we will have solved those problems at the end of that 2 years. The second thing we're doing is we are slowing the ramp of procurement. The procurement will be flat from fiscal 11 to 12, and the ramp will be slower by over 100 aircraft in the plan than we had in the 5-year plan than we had planned last year. This is reducing concurrency and getting further in development before we invest more in production. It is a more conservative approach. And then finally, third, to address any operational gaps that we have by slowing that procurement, we've added about 40 F-18s to the line so that we are able to fill out the fleet in the interim period.
Right. And then that obviously is a major challenge. The tens of billions of dollars more than was expected that are being spent on that critical piece of our national security presents some of the challenges for the budget going forward. Just one final question. General Corelli, can you walk us through a little bit the early infantry brigade combat team update, sort of as I like to refer to it, son of future combat systems, if you will, our effort to update those programs, information warfare in the battlefield space for our brigade teams has not gone terribly smoothly, as you know, in terms of the testing, and I know you've been working hard to update that, make sure we get the equipment we need, get rid of what doesn't work and keep what does. Can you just walk us through a little bit in light of the most recent testing, where we're at on that and how you're planning on going forward?
Well, we're very, very pleased with where we are with the network right now. And we are very pleased with the SUG-V, which is the little robot that goes around. Some of the others have created some challenges for us, and we'll be looking before too long, once the RMD is complete, to make some decisions on some of the other systems.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. Whatever our top line is, we need to be as efficient as we can in using the monies. There are 3 areas that I know we all have concerns about, and I just wanted to see where you are going with trying to solve these problems. I'm a huge supporter of research and early R&D. You never know, if you don't try, what will come of it. So I don't want my concern here to be in any way indicate that I'm not a big supporter of research and R&D. I think we need to do more of that, not less of that. I think we spend too little money there. But I'm very much concerned that we have too many programs that continue to the late R&D stage. There is no way we could possibly procure all of them, and so we have to find a mechanism for aborting these things earlier rather than later, because there's just no way that we could procure all of the end items with the number of programs that we now have in late R&D. How are we going to address that problem? A second problem is when a program is not going well, it has to really, really be moribund before we abort it. 2 recent programs are Future Combat Systems and the Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle. You know, and after years and years and billions of dollars, we finally said, hey, that's not a good idea. I think there were a number of people along the way who said way earlier than that that was not a good idea, that we shouldn't be doing that. How do we address that problem so, you know, come to the point where we have these sunk costs of billions of dollars and boarding a program where parts are made in many, many districts across the country, so it gets wide congressional support. And the third problem is there's always some new technology we can add. I've been here 18 years now. We never have finished a program on time and on budget, and we are partly responsible for that because we keep saying, gee, couldn't it be a little better and let's add this new technology? How do we determine it's good enough and we stop there? We have an open architecture so that we can add these improvements later, because many times we're going to have to live with these things for the next 40 years, so we want it to be as good as it can be. How are we addressing these problems? There are huge potential savings in these areas. How do we get there?
Let me take your questions in order, Mr. Bartlett. One, we agree with you on the basic R&D, and the budget that we'll send to you next month will indeed have real growth in basic R&D. Try to protect that seed corn that you're rightly concerned about. With regard to decisions on programs, I guess that's not a criticism I think Secretary Gates has suffered from. He has made, I think, some tough decisions, whether it's on the presidential helicopter or the F-22 earlier, or the future combat system that you mentioned, which he terminated, and the expeditionary fighting vehicle this year. I think the thrust of your question is right. The department needs to make hard decisions early. And we're endeavoring to do that. I think you're right. It's challenging, both in terms of the support programs build up, as well as it is always difficult to know when you've reached the point of, do you have enough knowledge to make the decision, or is it going to get better just around the next corner, which tends to be the promise. Your third question on how do we, I think it goes to what the effort Mr. Andrews and others led on this committee. It's the fundamental thrust of acquisition reform. It's how do you have budget and schedule be equally important as performance? You have to balance between all three. I think we have often balanced in favor of performance for often good reasons, but budget and schedule suffers. We are trying to, in our acquisition reform efforts, balance better. And you will see, for example, in the program we're presenting next month that we've, as the Secretary's announced, we are going to pursue a new bomber program as part of a family of systems approach to long-range strike. An important element of that new bomber program will be a firm view of what the unit cost of that bomber ought to be, and that we ought to develop the best possible technology, but at that price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, welcome. First question is for General Corelli. The committee was told by Undersecretary Westphal that the Army was intending on reinvesting some of its savings in the efficiency account in the Abrams, Bradleys, and Stryker vehicle, doing upgrades for those three. Could you provide us with a little more detail on those upgrades? And also, how much additional funding was the Army able to allocate to modernize these particular vehicles, and how will it provide better capability for the soldiers?
Well, those are three systems that we currently have been able to put some money in from our efficiencies, along with many others. In Stryker, I think, you know, we're moving ahead with a double V hull. We have been completing some testing, and that testing has come out very, very satisfactory. We are very, very pleased with it, and are moving ahead to provide additional protection for the entire crew of the Stryker, above what we have right now with the flat bottom hull. with some of the add-on armor kits. It's a great improvement. We will be making increases or changes, improvements to both the Stryker and the Bradley, and I'll have to get you the exact dollars on that at a later time, sir, and I will get those to you.
Okay. The other area I'd like to ask is in the area of the Patriot missile upgrades, and also the counter-rocket artillery mortar systems. What is the Army intending to do with those kinds of upgrades, and how will they play out into the capabilities to continue to procure, and obviously with the end result of helping to protect our soldiers in the field?
Well, sir, those improvements grew out of our portfolio reviews where we took like-type systems and looked at the entire portfolio and compared systems. That came out of a portfolio we call air and missile defense. And when we looked at that portfolio, we saw we had some broken programs. One of the programs that we had concern with was SLAM-RAM. The cost of that missile for SLAM-RAM had grown from $300,000 to, I'm told, over $1 million a copy now. In Palm 10-15, we were only buying 100 of those missiles. And quite frankly, we saw changes in the threat from the time that program had been conceived. We were able to take the savings from that particular program and apply them against Patriot and against counter-rocket and counter-mortar because, quite frankly, counter-rocket and counter-mortar are the threats that are affecting our troops downrange today. So with over $1 billion in SLAM-RAM savings, we were able to reinvest that in counter-rocket and counter-mortar and also in upgrading Patriot.
Very good. Thank you, General. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned Joint Forces Command in your opening statement, and as I'm sure you remember from your previous time, a primary reason that the command was created was to have a major command that looks forward, a future command, and have joint experimentation come together so that you have a person at the table who is not just worried about what's happening today, but looking ahead. So if the command goes away, and there's lots of reasons I understand to do that, who does that? Or is it y'all's view that you don't need that person who is future-oriented with the joint experimentation capability?
We agree with you, Congressman, that certainly looking to the future, and in particular the emphasis on jointness through experimentation, through development of doctrine are critical roles. We did not think at the point we are in the department, that we needed a command to do that. Now, we are retaining many of the sub-organizations, about half is the rough estimate, that we're doing that, including the Joint Experimentation Group. They will report, the final recommendations are still being developed, but the joint staff and the chairman and the vice chairman will play a stronger role in advocating for jointness, in advocating for development of joint doctrine in this post-JIFCOM world.
Yeah, I think the concern is you bury stuff down in the bureaucracy, it's never going to percolate through, and that's part of where we were before Joint Forces Command. General Dunford, I'm not an expert in this area, but my understanding was the Marine Corps has had a requirement that the Navy's going to get the Marines so close, so many miles from shore, then they got to be transferred into some amphibious vehicles that will get them onto shore in a certain amount of time so that they're in fighting condition. Have those requirements changed? Have the miles changed? Have the time changed?
Congressman, thank you. First, we are and continue to be committed to the capability that was represented by the EFE, that is to be able to provide the nation with a short access. Historically, we have planned over the past 2 decades for Marines to be discharged at 25 nautical miles. In recent discussions with the Navy, those figures have in fact changed, and we're in the process now of refining the requirement. And we think it's somewhere in excess of 12 nautical miles, but something less than 25 nautical miles. So we are, in fact, reviewing the requirement right now in the context of both our capabilities and limitations, as well as the enemy's capability limitations, particularly some newly fielded equipment inside of the Department of the Navy.
Admiral, is the Navy okay with getting closer to shore and being more at risk of missiles from reaching the ships?
Congressman, we are. We've taken a very close look at this, and with our integrated fire control capabilities in the future, our ability to network with the self-protection, the RAM, and some of the other systems, that's rolling airframe missile, that we have, our counter-swarm capability, we believe, and I'm in concurrence with General Dunford, somewhere around 12 miles, maybe a little bit more, is acceptable. We've modeled this closely, we've war-gamed it closely, we're reasonably comfortable. There may be situations when, as the Maritime Component Commander, we may not have as much time as we assume we will have, where we'll have to look at the risk factor regarding that. That will be the individual operator's judgment on that case. But overall, we're good with it.
Well, I appreciate y'all's answers. I think these are just two examples I picked of where we want to have further discussions with you. There has been a sense, at least from my part, that some edict comes down from on high saying cut the budget and y'all do the best you can and try to put a rosy face on it. And I think the concern that some of us have is, okay, what are the implications of eliminating this vehicle, eliminating this command? Have we thought through who does it, what kind of capability we lose if that happens? And there is, personally, I think there is concern about having that thought through and analyzed rather than going through strictly a budget exercise, even though obviously all of us are in favor of finding efficiencies wherever we can. So I appreciate it. I think there is further discussion to be had. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Secretary, thank you for referencing the work the members of this committee did on procurement reform. Mr. Conaway deserves at least equal credit for that, as do many members, and we appreciate the fact you're already starting to implement those reforms. Thank you. I wanted to come back to the top line discussion where Secretary Gates on January 6th talked about the $78 billion off the top line through the efficiencies that have been outlined. Under the 5-year plan that you're presently working under, defense spending will still be considerably higher 5 years from today than it is today. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
If I look at the math correctly, the difference between the plan that you're presently operating on and what Secretary Gates has now suggested is instead of the defense budget being 17% higher than it is today, it'll be about 14.5% higher than it is today. Is that essentially right?
I don't have the math in front of me, but it sounds right.
Yeah, the numbers to me were $567 billion in the base budget in the first year and $663 by the 5th year. He would take that down by $78 billion over 5 years. Given that, I want to commend you and the Secretary for the real choices that you're putting before this committee and the Congress. The easiest thing to do here, it's been done for 2 decades or longer, is to say there can be operating efficiencies and overhead savings and we can spend less if we do that. In the 20 years since that's been said, the budget has probably tripled, not just doubled. So there really have to be some real decisions, and I think you've raised a very interesting one with the EFV recommendation. I know that the EFV had a Nunn-McCurdy breach in 2007, and as our expert staff tells us, a Nunn-McCurdy breach is triggered under the law when a program exceeds its budgeted schedule by 25% or more. Do you happen to recall the magnitude of the Nunn-McCurdy breach for the EFV? How far over budget was it?
Unless General Dunford can provide it, I have to provide it for the record.
Congressman, I can talk to the unit cost. The unit cost was $5 million in 1995. At that time, we had planned to buy 1,013 vehicles. The program now is 573 vehicles, and it's $17 million for unit cost.
So
as you can see, it's significantly more. I think the Nunn-McCurdy threshold is about 25%, so we exceeded the Nunn-McCurdy threshold for unit cost.
So let me get this straight. When the Congress made a decision to procure these vessels in 1995, we were anticipating they'd cost $5 million a copy, and that's ballooned to $17 million?
That's correct.
So it's more than tripled in cost. In layperson's language, why is that? Why did it more than triple in cost?
One critical factor is that at the time in 1995, we plan on buying 1,013 vehicles. The current program is 573 vehicles, so that accounts for some of the unit cost. Quite frankly, Congressman, I can't tell you why the rest, why it exceeded cost in other areas. I do know that the unit cost was impacted by the total number of vehicles that we're in to buy. And other factors, really, I think probably General Dynamics can be better able to explain that than me.
My understanding is that we've not yet passed milestone B on this program, that we were approaching it but not yet passed it.
Congressman, we're just about to be at knowledge point 2 in February.
Mm-hmm. And what planning has taken place in the department with respect to an alternative if, in fact, we don't procure these vessels that have been presently planned? How would we get Marines from the ship to the shore?
Congressman, as I mentioned earlier, first, we are committed to continuing to be able to do that and provide assured access for the nation. So we're committed to getting a vehicle that moves from ship to shore. We believe that the knowledge that we have learned in the EFV program, combined with some new acquisition processes, will allow us to get a vehicle that will allow us to meet the operational requirement at significantly less cost.
Is there going to be a gap between when we get to that point and now? Is there any operating deficiency that the Marines would be subjected to?
We can currently meet our requirements. The use of the assault amphibious vehicle, which is a legacy program, absolutely has an effect on our tactics, techniques, and procedures. So we mitigate the risk of a legacy program by our employment concepts. What we will do now is take a look at a service life extension program for the assault amphibious vehicle to address some of the lethality shortfalls, some of the mobility shortfalls, and then we also at the same time will take a look at what the expeditionary fighting vehicle really represents is a small part of our overall ground tactical vehicle plan, and about 2/3 of what we need to come from ship to shore in armored vehicles. So we'll take a look also now at addressing what we call the Marine Personnel Carrier, which is the balance of our amphibious capability.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, I didn't want to interrupt when you were asking the questions, but I'd like to have a little understanding. When the Secretary briefed us on this additional $78 billion, what he said was next year's budget would have a 1% increase, the following year a 0.5%, and then 3 years of flat. Now, how does that grow those kind of numbers?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yeah.
If I may, before the Secretary does. My understanding is that the numbers are in real dollar terms. So that's how.
That's part of the answer. Mr. Chairman, we don't actually know what the fiscal 11 to 12 growth rate is, again, because we don't know what the fiscal 11 budget, but it will be somewhere between 1.5% and 3% real growth. That's on top of inflation, which is in the 1.5% to 2%. So you're looking at nominal growth of 4 or 5% fiscal 12. Then the real growth in fiscal 13 and 14 is 1% in 13, 0.5% in 14, then 0 real in 15 and 16. In other words, the budget would still grow, but only to keep pace with inflation. So that when you net those numbers up, I believe you end up with the line that Congressman Andrews led with.
Okay, so in current dollars, it wouldn't grow by those numbers. It would be inflated dollars.
In current dollars, it would grow more because of the addition of inflation. That's
right.
When the Secretary said to you 1%, 0.5%, 0, he was talking real. You have to add inflation to that.
Thank you. Mr. Aiken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to start by making a distinction between two things, and I have to say that I don't have so many questions as answers. We still get 5 minutes for answers, so I'm going to just give you a little bit of where I'm coming from sitting in this committee. The first thing is what you've done. You start at the beginning of the year decided we're going to cut defense by $78 billion, make some big changes in various programs, and a whole series of decisions. The question is, were those all good decisions or not? That's one question. The second point, though, is how you did it. The U.S. Constitution requires the members of this committee to be involved and be part of the decisions for national security. The end of last year, this committee was approached on the fact that we had an opportunity to get 2 purchases for 10 littoral combat ships, which was different than what we had planned. At the last minute, we were said, this would be a good idea for the Navy. It saves us some money, and it's a good thing to do. We took a look at the numbers in a very compressed time frame, passed legislation, and supported the Navy in that decision, even though we had no idea that it was coming till a week or so before, a couple weeks before, when we actually made the legislation and got it done. We worked with you as co-partners. This month, we receive like a CC on a general press release to the public that we've made all of these unilateral decisions, and we had no idea a bunch of them were even coming. The expeditionary fighting vehicle strikes me as one where the assumptions are very thin. It appears that we are almost canceling a capability in order to make a $78 billion cut on the surface. We'll look into it. But my concern is that you are trying to make, or you have inadvertently made this committee irrelevant because you're not keeping us in the loop, informing us of what you're looking at. That has gotten progressively worse over 10 years to where it is right now. And that's unacceptable, at least to me as a subcommittee chair, and I believe I may speak for a few other members of this committee that we want to be part of the decision-making process. If you go back 200 years and look at the history of our national defense, you find that it's a partnership between military and civilians, and both sides play a role in that, and at times the civilian side, that is this committee, has made recommendations in 20/20 hindsight that have turned out to be very good military decisions, such as, among other things, arming predators. And I don't like, and I don't think this committee will tolerate being left out of the process of decision-making. So we will have our hearings, and we will look into those decisions, and the decisions that we think are poor, we will not be shy about explaining why we think those are poor decisions. But I just think it's clear in January, when we're starting off on a new foot, that we understand each other, and I'm going to try to explain it so that you understood where we're coming from, because we don't like to be called at the last minute and said, I talked to the Secretary of the Navy 2 days ago, and I said, I'm very concerned about cutting the defense budget. He said, oh, there's not any cuts to the defense budget that he knew of. Well, we had a speech last night that talked about it. Now, to the overall concept, I think it is in your best interest to use us as part of your team to help you do your jobs. I think it's foolish to ignore us, because here's what's going on. You want to take a big look at where we are budget-wise in this country. You take your entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, add the other entitlements, and then add service on the debt, which is like an entitlement, because when we sell a U.S. Treasury or something, we have to keep paying the interest like a little machine that spits out dollar bills. We can't not pay that. So you take all those entitlements together, add them up. Right now, those entitlements are equal to the revenue that we take in as a nation. So you can cut defense to zero, cut discretionary spending to zero, and we're still just even. You cannot pay for entitlements by cutting defense, but you can destroy our country by cutting defense. Now, you want to take a look at some concerning numbers. If you take a look at defense spending as a percent of total budget authority, we are now, with these proposed cuts, to the same place we were in '98 when we hollowed out our forces. That's the kind of thing that it's our job to be concerned with, and our job to go to bat and say to the Budget Committee, wait a minute, we really can't take defense. We can't take the Marines and deny them the capability to go from ship to shore. And if you want to put new engines in some vehicles that date back to the Korean era, and they can go from 4 to 6 knots. Somehow or other, I'm not seeing that as a very workable solution, with all due respect to my good friends from the Marine Corps. I know you're trying to do what you think you got to do budget-wise, but some of these decisions need to be run by this committee first, and I just want to put a marker down. Mr. Chairman, if I'm a little too strong, correct me, but that's my strong sense. There needs to be partnership. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you all for your distinguished service. I want to turn to an issue that involves our people, the men and women who serve. I know that the department is looking at a number of reforms in the area of military health care. And clearly, in many ways, everything is on the table here. But I wonder if you could share with me what concerns the services have raised as it reflects some of the proposals that you have in health care. Now, I know we're not looking at specifics right now, but I'm just wondering somewhat about that process and about how the services are weighing in, what their concerns are. What have they raised?
Well, let me let the Vice Chief speak for themselves. Let me just give an opening comment. As you indicated, part of the development of this program was an attempt to rein in health care costs, which have more than doubled over the past 10 years. There's some proposals with regard to fees, with hospitals, pharmacy benefit, and overall efficiencies. Happy to go into more detail at the appropriate time, but the process by which those were developed was a full department-wide process led by the Secretary. Where he had a series of meetings that included the entire leadership, the chiefs, the service secretaries, the combatant commanders, senior OSD leadership. I know Chairman Mullen led at least one, I think more than one, tank session. So this was a very fulsome process, but let me turn to the Vice Chiefs for their reaction.
I would just echo what Secretary Lynn said. We were part of that process and agreed with the decisions that have been made. I will tell you, in my area, the area that I'm most concerned about is I don't have enough uniformed health care providers. We made a decision in the Army a while ago to cap the number of uniformed military health care providers we had at a certain number, and I need to find room inside my end strength to add some more. It's just not enough. We've been able to make up with that through contract health care in certain areas, but when it comes to areas like behavioral health care, I've got a real problem there, as the nation has a real problem there, because we just don't have enough. So I find myself competing with the nation to get that really, really important asset that the United States Army needs at this particular time. A great example I'll give you, second and third order effects, is I need alcohol and substance abuse counselors. But many of them have the degrees necessary to fleet up to become behavioral health specialists at an increased salary. So what I find myself doing, as hard as I try to hire alcohol and drug abuse counselors, I bring in 5 to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and I lose 5 as they fleet up to behavioral health specialist positions that pay additional funds. So that's an area for me that is of concern.
Thank you, ma'am. I echo General Corelli's comments regarding uniformed health care providers. Our concern was, as we reviewed, and there were more initiatives than what is in the budget, and some were removed. Our concern was to ensure that our active duty members and their families received proper care and world-class care that they deserve, and we're comfortable with that. To make sure that that availability of care outside the service when need to, consults, that capacity was still there, and we're comfortable with that, and that pharmacy, any changes to the pharmacy, that we could retain that service and make it available. Again, we were comfortable. Ma'am, I'd say it was a collaborative process.
Yeah, so you're saying, particularly on the pharmacy benefit, that you didn't see any drawbacks to that would affect the men and women?
That's correct.
Congresswoman, like the other Vice Chiefs, our primary concern was ensuring that our Marines that are forward deployed have world-class medical care. We're also concerned with making sure that our Marines, when they come home, and their families have world-class medical care. And we're unaware of any initiatives in the proposals that would degrade that health care. And so we have very much been part of that process. And we have looked at the other initiatives that don't affect the active duty force and have been, again, part of that process and feel like we have an opportunity to shape that.
Ma'am, I would echo the remarks of my fellow vice chiefs. It was a collaborative process. We were a part of it, and we joined that process. In the Air Force, we remain focused on the downrange care of our troops involved in the conflict. But we recently finished the Year of the Family in the Air Force, and we focused on the aftercare as our troops come home, and also taking care of those families when their troops are downrange. And we continue to remain focused on that, and we don't see any detriment to that in what we see in this business.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, because I think there have been some concerns that there hasn't been the kind of involvement of the different services in that decision. So I want to be sure that we're balancing the need to find some savings, but at the same time, clearly those benefits are expected, and people deserve those benefits, and we want to be sure that we're doing that in the proper way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Forbes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's great to see you, and as you know, we've got a limited amount of time, so I'll be concise, and I hope you will be as well. In your statement, you said we owe it to the taxpayers to make the most of every dollar entrusted to us, and then you go on to say one of the ways we're going to do that is the services will achieve savings through implementing better business practices. I looked at many of our Fortune 500 companies to see some of their business practices, and if you look at companies like Walmart, AT&T, Hewlett-Packard, Verizon, IBM, Procter & Gamble, Kroger, Costco, Boeing, Home Depot, Target, they will indicate to you that the core business practice that is superior to all of the others is to make sure they know where their money's going by having audited financial statements. In fact, Congress feels so strongly about that, we required them by law to do the same. Now, in the Department of Defense, we are giving to you what would essentially be the 22nd largest economy in the world if you were a country. It's over $700 billion last year. And as you know, by law, we require our agency heads to submit to us audited financial statements each year so that we know where the money's going. Now, 21 different agencies have complied with that. Clearly, the statute came back and said the Department of Defense needed to do that. And in your statement, you go on to say, proposals we're describing today are the result of a detailed, comprehensive budget and program review led by Secretary Gates and involving the entire senior military and civilian leadership of the department. So, Mr. Secretary, my question for you, first one today, is what percentage of the $700 billion budget of the Department of Defense did Secretary Gates file the audited financial statements required by law in 2007?
Mr. Forbes, the department does not have an auditable financial statement.
So none were filed in 2007?
I think one or two agencies, but it's a very small part of the budget.
First of all, you're the Chief Management Officer of the Department of Defense. Is it your testimony today that you do not know how many were filed, or are you testifying that 2 agencies did file on the Department of Defense?
I'm going to have to provide the exact number.
I'll tell you it was none. How about in 2008?
Well, 2008, I wasn't at the department.
Do you know whether any financial statements were filed?
I doubt. I don't think it would have been any.
How about 2009?
I think the same answer.
How about 2010?
I believe the same answer.
Do you know how many will be filed in 2011?
The same.
Do you know what percentage of the $700 billion budget in the Department of Defense will be an audit-ready posture for 2011? That is, that we could even be capable of auditing.
I don't think any, sir.
The President last night told us that in making decisions in our country, he said, and quote, "It will be harder because we'll argue about everything, the cost, the details, the letter of every law. Of course, some countries don't have this problem. If the central government wants a railroad, they build a railroad. No matter how many homes get bulldozed, if they don't want a bad story in the newspaper, it doesn't get written. But we all believe in the rights enshrined in our Constitution." Mr. Secretary, I believe that the Department of Defense has developed the philosophy of bulldozing. When you make a decision, you make the decision, and as Congressman Aiken said, you don't even include us, you don't even give us the information, and then you bulldoze ahead without doing the tough work of trying to work it through us. You know, when we ask you to bring to us individuals who can testify, give us your analysis, give us your documentation of these cuts or anything else, you refuse to do it. So then we ask you to do the report so that we can get the information and we can reach an analysis. And the Secretary does press conferences poo-pooing reports to Congress, and that's just too tough, it's too hard, we're not going to do reports. So then we put it in the law and we say you got to comply with it because this is the law of the land. But when we did that for a shipbuilding plan, the Secretary just said, I'm not going to give it to you. When we put it in the aviation plan, the Secretary said, we're just not going to give it to you. And when we require audited financial statements so we can just know where our money's going, Secretary just says not going to do it. And the question we ought to be asking ourselves, is DOD above the law? What do we have to do to get you to comply with the law? And how can we even begin to talk about savings and efficiencies when we cannot verify a single dollar of where our defense budget is going? And Mr. Chairman, I close by just saying this. Shame on us if we continue to give the Department of Defense billions of dollars without doing the most basic of all good business practices, by simply knowing where that money is going. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond to a couple of the remarks there. First, I agree with Congressman Forbes. We do need to develop auditable financial statements. We've developed a plan to do that. The plan is quite aggressive. It's going to be difficult to achieve. And we have focused on the budgetary resources for the reasons that you gave, that is the most important responsibility of the Department, to be able to tell the Congress and the taxpayers how each dollar is spent. So the Secretary very much agrees that we need to comply with this. We have a plan to do that. With regard to the shipbuilding and the aviation plans, I think that was a disagreement with the committees, as we did provide those when we had them. When the committee was asking for it was in the first couple of months where the administration had taken office, and they simply didn't exist. As soon as they existed, we did provide them to the Department.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to take more of my time, but just to respond to the Secretary. Mr. Secretary, it wasn't the committees that requested it. It was the law that requested when you had to file it, and it told you what to do if you didn't have a plan. And secondly, if any of these Fortune 500 companies came up and said, we just can't comply with the law because it's too hard, what would we do to them? And you know, I think it's a priority that we ought to make in the Department, and we ought to insist on it to this committee. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the extra.
Thank you. Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations on your first hearing. I'd like to just say that I actually think that on the merits, Congressman Forbes is absolutely right about what the law says, and it was very frustrating over the last 2 years that we didn't get that shipbuilding plan. But as you said, we did get it last year. And I'd like to actually focus for a minute, Admiral Greenert, on the testimony regarding the impact of these changes to the Navy and ship acquisition. Again, the testimony we received is that the savings will be directed towards, again, reinvestment in the Navy, and that 6 ships are going to be added to the Navy's fleet as a result of this. And well, I guess the first question I have is that going to change the shipbuilding plan that was submitted last year?
Yes, sir, it will. From the perspective of there'll be an additional 6 ships to that shipbuilding plan. We've been able to move ahead in some of our required shipbuilding. For example, oilers. We need to get double-hulled oilers. We're operating on a waiver. That is a U.S. waiver, and around the world we may not have those waivers, so that helps us toward the longer view. It brings us with another destroyer, Arleigh Burke destroyer, which helps us, obviously increases our warfighting capability right there. And then, of course, the last one would be the Tagos, or the sonar trailing ship, if you will, which increases our ASW capability.
Well, to me, you know, that's a priority.
Mr. Courtney?
Yes.
If I could just interrupt just for a second. We have been told with the new schedule this year that we won't be interrupted with votes. That will start the week of the 14th. We have just been interrupted by a vote, and the votes are going to be shorter than in the past. We can't wait till it's almost over. So you will be the last questioner, but anybody else that wants to leave now to vote, there will be 2 votes, and then we will return, and Mr. Wilson will be first after Mr. Courtney.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, what you just described obviously addresses a priority that this committee, and particularly the Sea Power Committee, has been struggling with for years, which is despite the massive increase in the Pentagon, we have steadily seen the fleet size fall below what the Navy has told us repeatedly is necessary, a 313 ship Navy. And to me, if we're finding ways to, again, make the Navy more efficient and reinvest it in what I think everybody agrees is what we all want, then that's certainly not weakening our defense. It's actually accelerating the path to get to the goal that we all want. The sort of story that I think, cautionary tale that I think we in this committee have to keep aware of, particularly in the context of shipbuilding, is what happened with the Zumwalt, the DDG 1000, where again, anything goes in terms of the way that was put together, and it crashed and collapsed of its own weight because of the high cost. And last year, the shipbuilding plan that was sent over projected out a huge bulge that was going to be caused by the SSBN price tag, $7 billion per copy. It's my understanding that, again, the Pentagon has really worked hard to try and bring that price down so that we don't find ourselves in a Zumwalt-like situation 5-10 years from now. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that cost savings measure and any progress that the Navy's achieved.
Thank you for the question, sir. Yes, we have a very collaborative process, I believe, on the Ohio replacement program. A little bit to Mr. Bartlett's question or comment earlier, how is it that we can interject, if you will, cost as a key performance parameter? And so we have a cost threshold and objective on the Ohio replacement program. Point here is, as we develop this, as we are into the early phases of design, we have to address cost again and again and again as a function and balance it against the capabilities. We haven't been very good at doing that in the early phases. It's been all about capability, and then we deal with the bill later. So we're very focused on that. As you know, sir, because of your background and in your area of shipbuilding, this is a fairly well-defined capability that we're building. And so this is a good program to get started in this regard.
And certainly the shipbuilding plan, the nuclear posture review, the quadrennial defense review, all were unanimous in saying that this is something that is essential to having a sea-based nuclear deterrence is something that we must move forward on, but we can't allow cost to consume every other aspect of the Navy's budget and frankly put pressure on the rest of the Pentagon. Secretary Lynn, in your opening comments you talked about the end strength changes post-2015. Again, when I first came to Congress in 2007, that was one of Secretary Gates' first initiatives, which was to expand the end strength for the Army and the Marines. You alluded to the fact that we would still end up at a net position stronger than we were in 2007, but you didn't really sort of flesh out the numbers. I was wondering maybe if you could describe that in a little more detail. Obviously, we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where the Guard and Reserves are really forced to do something that they never had to be done in the past and pick up the slack.
I'm going to ask for help from the vices on that. I think the Army, after the 27,000 reduction, will be about 30,000 above what Secretary Gates, is that right?
Well, sir, if you add in the increases to the Guard and Reserve, which are not part of the decrease, in reality will be 38 plus another 9. Which is 47 higher than we were when Secretary Gates became Secretary of Defense.
And then the Marine Corps, General Dunford?
Congressman, we've been given a window of 15 to 20,000, but we still have an opportunity to go back to the Secretary of Defense and provide him with the results of our recent Force Structure Review Group. So the Commandant's taking a look at the comprehensive capabilities and capacities that we will need, and he feels confident he'll have a chance to talk to the Secretary about the specific end strength that the Marine Corps will have in the future.
Thank you.
We'll now take about a 15-minute break. We'll get back as quickly as we can. Thank you very much.